So, I wanted to do a little share and a talk out about some of the links within the current political climate and just what is coming up for me personally with having experienced a lot of religion trauma growing up, being raised very evangelical and conservative, and just all the steps kind of in between because I have had to do a lot of deconstructing to go from how I was raised, the mindsets and belief systems I was taught to fully subscribe to, and where I have ended up now. And it is wild from a trauma healing standpoint to really see a lot of the very themes that I would have doubled down on, preached to everybody, like now being at the very head of our government, and people that think all of that is so beautiful and welcomed. And from the other side of that belief system, it's crazy because I both simultaneously can feel the frustration and anger and exploitation of so many things when they speak and are, really happy with what is currently going on. And I can also understand because I was once in that mindset, just the processing that is happening internally, which is just such a unique perspective to have in this. And I know I am not alone in the fact that a lot of people were very raised in this. I think it comes down to really thinking that the way the system is running is the standard and the normal, and being so intertwined with the system as it is that everything that goes anti the system feels like this far outside thought process that is delusional and crazy. And when you're in the system and you're subscribed to it fully, it feels like something you're supposed to stand in. From doing tons of work, I see that very ego driven, that we like to stay in our comfort zones. We like boxes that give us a form of control and give us a way to think that it takes out like a lot of the nuance that comes with high levels of emotional intelligence and empathy and just layers of letting yourself feel, which when you are feeling more, you don't function as well as in you will not be able to subscribe to the system as is in the same way once you really realize how much you are shoving down and suppressing and blocking because you wanted stuff that was easier to digest, a little easier to take in. And it's a lot more challenging to continuously strip away layers and belief systems that do give you a semi-sense of control. Yeah, evangelical Christianity is a very high controlled group. And now it's at the head of our government way of thinking. And I do believe that there are people within that belief system that have really beautiful hearts and can not be lumped in within that. But I think what the issue is now is there are so many people within the Christianity umbrella that are doing so much harm that unless you are standing so loudly in advocating for the differences of what is Christianity, even in other countries other than the US, Christianity that isn't tied and linked into the political world, the capitalistic world, because church in the US, all of those things are very blurred. High patriarchal thinking is very blurred. High capitalistic thinking is very blurred in with the church. There's these normal patterns of church behavior that you don't even blink twice at. I was raised to, first of all, not have women in leadership, that the men were a lot more built and in the image of God to be able to be at the head of authority. I remember being the person that would say women are too emotional, which is so terrifying to think about in this current now. That was where my mindset was, but that is what I was really taught to think and believe. And it just makes you put blinders on to how controlling patriarchal thinking is, that it completely makes you dependent off of it. It makes you not trust your own intuition, your own knowing, your own feelings, because it outsources your feelings to an authority figure that you believe holds more power and better understanding than what your own being is. When I really believe there is a spiritual divine connection to your soul's wants and its needs and its passions and its strengths and its weaknesses, and just how that cohesively ends up threading to the people around you. And when you are in that heavy patriarchal thinking, you just completely ignore your own instincts. You think that your emotions do make you crazier. You don't think you have the ability to rationalize, so you end up trusting authority that is being driven by God a lot more than the deeper calling of your soul and your knowing, which is coming from a divine source. Another big issue is I used to be really tied in with the tithing capitalistic mindset. These mega churches really push for you to give them resources and give a portion of the money you make to the church. It's been lots of exploitation within that, where you think you're living a comfortable life to pastor or the authority of the church, and you think they deserve to have like a very comfy life because they are giving you the channel of the divine and they are giving you the messages, and you feel so proud that you're able to support and love the family over your church. And there's this reframing of what is actually damaging, that I believe so much that the energy of giving would help me automatically receive. And I do think that does exist in a spiritual sense, that it is important for non-attachment that we do practice giving and receiving. But there was this guilt and pressure tied into it, where if I was having something chaotic go on in my life, it was always asked of me, like, well, are you actually giving money to the church? Are you giving resources? Like, maybe that's out of whack, and that can be why some of these more challenging things are happening in your life. So it became this guilt system of OCD loop, that if I'm not giving enough, then my life is going to fall apart. And then you find out like how many churches have exploited taking those resources that are coming in that might even be putting families in a worse place. They don't even fully have the resources to be doing that, but that OCD loop of, no, I'm in this bad situation because I haven't given enough, so I need to give even if it puts me in a worse place. It just fuels that. And then you find out like that money is not always being used very responsibly, and building out mega churches take up tons of space and have the highest quality. You think it's attracting more people to the church, it's modernizing it, it's making it more accessible so that the message of God can go out. It's also using tons of resources that could be going to people that really are struggling. We don't need to have these giant luxury spaces. Churches and gathering for spiritual could happen in parks and in neighborhoods, and could be done in such a more intentional way than just spending tons of money for this look. These churches have this inner competitiveness because it's usually an egocentric man at the top of the chain that wants everyone to love what he's done and fuel that ego. And it's crazy. I loved the Preachers and Sneakers account on Instagram, and just some of the movements that have been done to point out that a lot of these megachurch pastors are buying incredibly expensive stuff in the way they look. And I just remember I used to justify a lot of that and think like they do deserve good things because they are doing the Lord's work. Like that was how it was always taught to me. And it's very sad because that giving and receiving exchange can be so much deeper than money. And a lot of times the church will exploit like free volunteers, free interns. Definitely know some mega churches that have really sucked the gifts out of a lot of the youth that holds these really incredible artistic talents, and they'll use that, kind of linger in this promise that more will come back, and then they end up just shoving them off to the side once they've squeezed out so much of that artistic creative juice, and then just move on to the next. And it's soul crushing to see a lot of that. And if you don't have the creative talents, then we can use your resources in other ways. And in the end, there is so many things that are out of nature to what an actual spiritual community should be giving. And that's because it's tied in with capitalism. And it's very sad that in the structure in the United States, churches are tax-free. They get a lot of breaks. And it's crazy to actually look into the research of how many celebrities or people in higher power and money brackets will start churches or support and sponsor churches because it helps them write off some of their expenses and be in a better place financially when they don't actually care. So that's giving terrible roots to what might be church where you don't even see the back layers of it. You don't know all of this is going on, but when you actually trail it back enough, some of these bigger organizations and branches of religion hold a lot of gross integrity at its root system. And I think you can be so defensive of your religion that you're not even willing to look at that. There's also, it's been wild in my years of evangelical Christianity to see the layers of exploitation and abuse in all forms and within the church, and how a lot of that was rationalized to me is that people with the biggest calling for the Lord are often the ones that can fall into more evil easier, because evil will be trying to pull them from a good place. It gives power to not only an evil energy, but it doesn't provide any corrective way for filtrating what ends up being horrific abuse. And a lot of people that have major psychological issues can rise in power in the church very easily. End up at the top, or not only they're exploiting money, but they're exploiting the community that is the church. Such a look to a lot of the pastors now of being this cool everyday person. And I had so many people within my 23 years of going to the church consistently every week, if not once, multiple times. I've had so many of those people it's come out that there has been something very harmful in what they've done, and it just gets kind of explained away. Around 2020, I remember there was a big report that came out of people in positions of power or pastoral positions within the church, and so many of them had been accused or had accusations of misconduct, were still in positions of power. And it's believed that they can go through this therapeutic process, remember and repent, and just get rid of it. And it doesn't hold corrective action to the fact that the system continues to put a really high number of these people out. And it's not because evil is calling at them. It's because the system has horrible roots, and it doesn't actually call you to look at the things that really do matter. So many of the people that are within the church couldn't do half of the things that actually help grow your mind, body, spirit. There is a lot of stuff that needs done to strip away the mental damage that that process can create. So from a young age, some of these pastors have been in church their entire life. They've seen how men can climb to power and how women will go very submissive for them. There can be just like a allure to that, like, oh, I have a woman beside me that won't question my actions. Amazing. Then you come to learn that having people around you that question your actions and help you to see patterns that are shadowy or difficult are not unloving. They're doing it very loving. And there's a lot of ego behind not wanting to look at the depths of your church system because you're so defensive and reactive, and that defensive and reactive often comes from a lot of emotional immaturity, a lot of inability to actually sit with emotional state, which, yeah, the church will go into prayer, but they don't go into a lot of the ins and outs of self-development that it actually takes to grow. And because you're not really challenging yourself to change and processes that make you face discomforts, you have your community that thinks just like you and never wants to argue and keeps things very pleasant. You have your roles within the family that are exact playbook of how you should act. You don't have to question the phases of your reality because your system gives you an exact rule book. And change and discomfort is what helps you meet these sides of yourself that actually give you a lot of resilience emotionally. You don't become an emotional person that can't handle anything. You become someone that's going to sit with a feeling, stay in it, and not feel like you have to fight or defend or shut down or isolate. And it's wild how many just like emotional babies are at the top of some of these bigger organizations of religion, and you find out how they react once they've been called out, and that exits or goes into any accusations a whole lot of times is shoved off to the side or seen as they became ungodly or they became one with the world. They don't understand anymore. It silences the voices that would be potential for fixing something and fixing system and pointing accountability to deeper stuff. It points for the change that could exist within the church as it is to what a more spiritual based church and way of thinking could to no, this is the right way. Everyone else is crazy, or they went mentally ill, or they went into evil, they went into the world. Ignore them, don't talk to them, isolate, and you really realize that none of the people within the church system actually loved the authenticity of you. They like the you that was digestible and fit their narrative and their world and their understanding. I mean, that's not real connection. Real connection is the ugly, the beautiful, all the things in between being what is actually connected with. And we should be able to look at those heavy points without just a complete spiral or we're on the inside, you're on the outside sort of mindset to process that. It's really bleak and really dark. And yeah, I think just seeing the current political landscape, not only is things being done in the name of God and a lot of things being like, we need to take it back to an America that has Christian values, and they think that there's this huge push that Christianity is being threatened. I remember being raised in that way too, that there was going to come a day where everyone would be anti-Christian. There would be a day it would be embarrassing to be a Christian, and that we had to prepare ourselves to be ready to stand firm in our belief systems because they would be threatened. And that's exactly what they think is happening. I believe very strongly that this is the sign that they've been right all along, that this is what was always going to happen when that mindset and being programmed in that mindset not only has someone defend and be the front line of what is really ugly and gross behind the curtain. You have all these protectors, so no one ever looks back. They're only looking at fighting in those front lines. But it's also wild because the very system that has become Christianity, when people say they want to go back to a time where God was at the center of everything, we already know that the old times of America were really beautiful for rich white men. It was very ugly. We now know the history. We have enough of the internet where we've been able to gather a lot of resources, which they're also trying to slowly filtrate and push away. Anything that's trying to take knowledge from you should spark a red flag. But we also know the lived experience of many, the disabled community that got shoved away, a lot of families having to hide a family member. There were institutions of tons of abuse for people that were mentally handicapped, disabled, and just completely exploited. We also know that, there was so much racism tied in with everything. The history of slavery. We know the history of just white supremacy, and how there was really only one good time for people that followed the exact structure system of colonialism, which, morphed into capitalistic kind of build off that this country was built on. And it was built on a lot of exploitation. There were so many indigenous just completely wiped off the map so that this way of thinking would be able to prevail. So our roots are built on really gross foundation here within the United States. And it is so sad to see that they're trying to say that we got to bring it back to a time where God was at the center. God wasn't at the center. White privileged men were at the center. And it's going back loud because there has been not a big push of worldly evil ways, but a big push in everyone's human experience having space. We had gotten to a point where the rights for LGBTQIA community were better than they've ever been. We were getting to a place where there was diversity and inclusion programs being kind of mandated, where we were seeing a lot less racism within some of the system structure, not corrected, but better. And we were also seeing the rise of women's rights, the ability to choose, and all of those things were giving voice to everyone having a chance to be on the same platform. And the very system that they are trying to revert us back to is the one where they get to exploit everybody to send themselves up, which is so opposite of what the Christian values get promoted as. And yet, if you look at the legislation on what is building all of this stuff, it has roots within the church. The church is where all of this stuff hides. And we say, to each their own, and everyone should only, stay in their lane, not bring this into it. Religion is tied in with every single facet of what is happening within these system changes. And if they keep getting a pass to not get looked at because we want to keep it civil, let everyone have their belief systems, which in the end should be the case, but there's no separation of church and state happening. Their religion isn't being exploited and taken away and to be made fun of. It's just no longer at the head of everything. And that feels like a threat, because what they're actually wanting is not Christianity at the top, but power and exploitation, abilities and control for a very, very small chunk of people, while everyone else tremendously suffers because there's not a sense of safety for them to be able to take space and what their lived experience is and what their truth is. and our lived experiences. We've been able to hear voices, throughout different times of history and know what happened. And it doesn't make space for the people that some of the Christians think they're helping. They think they do all these causes to help people in lesser positions to them. But the very system is creating legislation with the money that's being donated to the churches. They help create legislation that in the end puts people in disadvantaged positions in a worse spot. It doesn't systematically end up playing out to what you think it does. And because no one's willing to look at all of this, because it poses too big of a threat on their belief system and their ego that they don't want to admit, we don't get anywhere. And the cycles continue, and people of color shouldn't even have to be fighting for this stuff anymore. I know and say all this knowing that I am in a very privileged position to be where I'm at, which is why communicating all this feels so important to me. But I've come to learn now from having an entire childhood where I shoved down so many of my emotions. I hated myself. I didn't even think I was supposed to have a sense of self. Anytime I was having an experience that felt like it was listening to the voice within, I completely correlated that to an inner evil that I was meant to ignore, which disconnected me from my body. I was dissociated most of the time. I never, ever even slightly opened the door ajar to what is being queer and understanding my neurodivergence, understanding the importance of my mental health. I shoved as much of that behind a closed door as I possibly could. I became extremely detached from my body, as I said, and I became so anxious, and I was starting to actually show PTSD symptoms in my early 20s. I had such poor regulation for anything. My body was already showing tremendous signs of burnout from neglecting my emotional health. And I had to do a lot of therapy, and I'm on the other side of it now. Not that I still don't have triggers. I'm very triggered by what is happening in the current political system, but I know who I am and my truths, and knowing that is the most beautiful gift. And I am so happy to be an autistic individual, a queer individual, a person that really deeply loves themselves and is able to take what is a spiritual belief system, but completely deconstruct it from the reality that was given to me within the church and religious sectors that try to exploit something that should never be exploited. I love my body now. I had so much hate for my body. My life used to mirror my religion and just a lot of self-hatred and going on endless diets so that I looked good and appeasing to the male gaze and the people of the church, and just like really gross, privileged, icky mindsets that I feel so happy to be on the other side of. Is how expansive and beautiful this all can be, this experience here on earth, our connection to the land, us people in their realest and truest form. There is so many people within my old world, my old life, who couldn't look into the eyes of another person and sit there in a loving way. It lacks so much truth and integrity. And I hope that everyone will take up space in their deepest authenticity and continue to deconstruct and realize that we now have the same communities that we already know the history for being exploited again. This mass immigration movement is putting people into terrible harm. It is separating families and is the most disturbing thing. And we don't realize how the very systems we have here, it costs too much money to do things to the book. The system has given us no resources down here in the people actually living the system, who don't come from places of privilege because their lineage has always been able to be at the top. You don't see the exploitation that happens for being queer. And now we're hearing stuff from RFK Jr. even on these wellness programs to exploit people that have autism and other neurodivergencies, which that led to the very same systems that put people with mental health crises into places where they weren't safe. We don't even have enough funding right now to fund the programs that were put in place to help this stuff have all been stripped away. There's a lot of prisons that don't even have enough support. So adding in more systems and thinking that they're going to be cared for correctly and that they have this light of being able to rehab something that wouldn't even need rehab if our system looked different is very important to pay attention to, because it is the stuff that is being said is missing the wholeness of what it actually is in reality. And we cannot be fooled by that rhetoric again and think that there was a time in history that we need to move back to. It does not serve humanity as it is. We need a different world, and we need a world that is actually built with loving roots, not exploitation. And that is the end of my rant for today. Thanks for listening in. You can see all the things that I offer for mind, body, spirit healing below. And I am really wanting to hear how this talk resonated with you. Thank you for hearing my words.